The HOA president's car sat squarely on the grass like it owned the place, no note. No apology. Just authority parked on someone else's land. Mark stood at his front window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the morning sun catch the tire tracks pressed into his lawn. This wasn't a mistake. It never was with her. Diane Keller had been president of the HOA for 6 years, and in that time, she had perfected the art of quiet control. She fined people for trash cans left out too long. She warned families about chalk drawings on sidewalks. And now, apparently, she treated private lawns like overflow parking. Mark didn't rush outside. He didn't shout. He simply watched her step out of the car. Heels sinking into the grass she had once cited him for uneven growth. She glanced at his house with the confidence of someone who believed rules only flowed in one direction. Toward others, neighbors noticed. Curtains shifted. Phones appeared behind glass. Everyone knew a scene was coming, because Diane never crossed a line unless she planned to enforce it later. What no one knew was that Mark had spent years learning how the HOA really worked. The bylaws. The loopholes. The quiet places where power broke down if someone stood still long enough. As Diane walked away, locking her car without a second look, Mark finally smiled. He wasn't angry. He was curious. Curious how far someone could push before consequences arrived, wearing a calm face. He set his coffee down, reached for his phone, and made a decision that would turn a simple parking violation into a story the entire neighborhood would never forget. By the time Diane returned, nothing would be the same. The morning after the incident felt heavier than usual. Daniel stood at his kitchen window, staring at the tire marks pressed into his grass like a deliberate insult. The HOA president's luxury SUV had sat there for hours the night before, ignoring his polite request and every posted boundary marker. Neighbors whispered as they walked by, some shaking their heads, others pretending not to see. Emails from the HOA began arriving before breakfast, cold and formal, accusing Daniel of overreacting and warning him not to escalate. What none of them understood was that Daniel had already spent years learning the rules they loved to misuse. He documented everything quietly, taking photos, saving messages, and reviewing property maps late into the night. The lawn was not common land. It never had been. As afternoon sunlight stretched across the street, Daniel made a calm decision that would change the balance of power. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He simply began preparing a response that followed the law perfectly, while forcing the HOA to face their own arrogance. And as the president drove by again, slowing to glare at his house, Daniel knew the next move would leave everyone stunned. That silence was intentional, designed to make them underestimate him, and it worked far better than shouting ever could. By evening, permits were printed, phone calls were logged. And a quiet confidence settled in. Daniel wasn't angry anymore, he was focused, patient, and ready. Tomorrow would prove who truly owned that piece of ground. The street felt quiet before a storm. He waited calm. By the third day, the HOA president realized something was wrong. Daniel had stopped responding entirely, yet unfamiliar survey flags now dotted the edge of his lawn. Contractors arrived in clean trucks, reviewing documents and measuring with quiet precision. The president stormed over, demanding answers, her confidence cracking as Daniel calmly handed her official paperwork. It clearly outlined his property boundaries, approved permits, and the legal consequences of further violations. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the tension hanging in the warm afternoon air. The HOA emails abruptly stopped. Instead, frantic phone calls began circulating among board members, each one confirming the same mistake. They had assumed Daniel would fold. He didn't. He followed the rules better than they ever had. As light reflected off the lake nearby, Daniel watched the realization spread across their faces. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was accountability delivered with patience. And just when the president thought the embarrassment was over, Daniel pointed toward the next phase of his plan, something fully approved and impossible to undo, leaving the crowd silent and eager to see what would happen next. Cameras came out, whispers grew louder, and the power dynamic shifted right there on the sidewalk. The president's voice softened, then failed, as legal reality replaced authority she once abused so freely. Daniel simply nodded, already steps ahead. The crowd sensed this story was far from finished. Even the wind felt tense, waiting for consequences to unfold. No one laughed. They wait. The HOA president didn't return the calls. She didn't respond to emails either. Instead, official notices began appearing in mailboxes across the neighborhood, written in stiff language and signed with forced confidence. They claimed Ethan had violated community harmony by creating unnecessary conflict. What they didn't mention was how that conflict started. Neighbors began comparing stories quietly. Many had experienced similar moments, but none had pushed back this far. Ethan stayed calm. He didn't argue online. He didn't shout at meetings. Instead, he gathered documents, old boundary surveys, city permits, and dated photographs. Every night, he reviewed them carefully, knowing timing mattered more than emotion. Then came the unexpected knock. A city zoning officer stood at the door, clipboard in hand. He wasn't there to accuse. He was there to confirm. The HOA president had filed a complaint, claiming Ethan altered shared land. As the officer walked the property, his expression slowly changed. The lawn wasn't shared. The markings were clear. The car had been parked without permission. The officer nodded and wrote quietly. "This isn't an HOA issue," he said. "This is private property." Ethan watched as the first crack formed in the wall of authority that once felt untouchable. And somewhere behind closed doors, panic had already begun. Word traveled faster than the HOA expected. Neighbors began stopping Ethan on evening walks, asking careful questions. Some apologized. Others admitted they had been afraid for years. The story wasn't about a lawn anymore. It was about control. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. The president sat stiffly at the front, her confident tone replaced with rehearsed calm. She spoke about rules, respect, and order. Then Ethan stood. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid the documents on the table. Survey maps. City confirmations. Written statements. Silence spread through the room as pages were passed around. The president's face tightened. She tried to interrupt, but the questions came faster than she could stop them. Why were fines issued without warnings? Why were cars towed without notice? Why was private land treated as communal property? The meeting ended early. No votes were taken. No decisions announced. But everyone felt it. The balance had shifted. That night, an email arrived from the HOA's legal counsel requesting a private discussion. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He waited. Because now, for the first time, they needed him more than he needed them. The discussion happened in a quiet office downtown. No raised voices. No threats. Just carefully chosen words. The attorney explained that mistakes had been made. Procedures misunderstood. Authority assumed where it didn't exist. An offer followed. Apologies, quietly issued. Fines erased. Records adjusted. Ethan listened, then declined. Not angrily. Just clearly. He asked for something different. Transparency. Written acknowledgement. A change in enforcement rules. And public accountability. Days later, notices went out again. This time, they admitted fault. The HOA president stepped down for personal reasons. An interim board was announced. New policies were promised. The lawn remained untouched. The sign marking private property stayed in place. And something else changed too. People began speaking openly. Attending meetings. Asking questions. Ethan realized the true moment of victory wasn't the apology. It was the silence of intimidation finally breaking. And the neighborhood felt lighter because of it. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal. Cars parked where they belonged. Notices followed proper steps. The HOA still existed, but its power felt smaller now, grounded instead of inflated. One afternoon, Ethan stood on his lawn, watching neighbors walk by without fear or tension. The grass hadn't changed. The house hadn't changed. But the atmosphere had. What started with someone parking where they didn't belong ended with an entire system being forced to look at itself. No shouting. No chaos. Just calm persistence. Ethan learned that standing up doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes, it means refusing to be pushed quietly, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.